Let's start here with something that sounds almost too simple to matter, but changes everything once you see it clearly. Ambiguity is not an accident. It's a strategy. When someone is avoidant and juggling multiple partners, the first thing you'll notice isn't dishonesty in the traditional sense. It's the absence of definition. They won't lie to your face and say we're exclusive when they're not. That's too risky, too binary, too easy to catch. Instead, they do something far more sophisticated. They keep the relationship suspended in a permanent state of almost. Let's see where this goes. I don't like labels. I'm just not ready to define things yet. Sound familiar? These aren't just casual phrases, they're architecture. They're the load-bearing walls of a structure built specifically to hold more than one person at a time, without any of those people having the full picture. Here's what I want you to understand at a deeper level. Undefined does not mean uninvested. This is the trap, because if someone is vague, we assume they're distant, unbothered, halfway out the door. But that's not what's happening. They're still calling, still showing up, still making you feel chosen in the moment. And that's exactly the point. The warmth has to stay high enough to keep you engaged, while the definition stays low enough to keep them free. Psychologically, this is what we call strategic ambiguity, and it's not unique to romance. It's the same mechanism a person uses when they don't want to fully commit to a job offer, a business deal, a decision. You keep every door open by refusing to close any of them. In relationships, it means never fully choosing you, because choosing you out loud in words would mean unchoosing someone else. And here's the deeper psychological root, because this isn't just manipulation for manipulation's sake. Often, it's fear wearing a disguise. Attachment research tells us that avoidant patterns usually form early as a defense against the vulnerability of depending on another person. Commitment to an avoidant nervous system doesn't feel like safety, it feels like danger. So keeping things undefined isn't just useful for managing multiple partners. It's also, on some level, self-protective. That doesn't excuse it, but it explains why the ambiguity feels so consistent, so practiced, so second nature to them. Now, here's the question I want you sitting with. If someone genuinely wanted only you, would they need you to guess? Real interest doesn't require detective work. Real investment doesn't hide behind the phrase, I'm just not a labels person, indefinitely, month after month, while every other part of their life is perfectly capable of clarity. People who want something make it known. People who want options make it vague. So when you notice that suspended, undefined space, that's not a gray area you're failing to interpret correctly. That's information. That's the system working exactly as it was built to. And that ambiguity doesn't exist in isolation. It's the opening move, because once someone learns they can keep things undefined without consequence, everything else follows. The inconsistency, the compartmentalization, the emotional ceiling. Which brings us to the second sign, because if the first one is about what they won't say, the next one is about what they won't show up for. So let's talk about what happens after the ambiguity settles in. Because once someone doesn't have to define the relationship, the next thing they stop having to do is explain themselves. And that's where you start to feel it, not in what they say, but in the rhythm of how they show up. Notice the pattern, intensity, then silence, presence, then absence. One day you're the center of their attention, texts all day, plans made, energy that feels like devotion. And then without warning, it stops, no explanation, no, hey, I've been overwhelmed, just gone. And then just as suddenly, they're back. As if no time passed at all, as if you're supposed to just pick up exactly where you left off. I want you to really sit with what that rhythm is doing to your nervous system, because it's not random, and it's not simply someone who's bad at texting. Unpredictable reinforcement is one of the most powerful psychological patterns we know of. It's the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. When a reward comes consistently, we adjust to it, we relax into it. But when a reward comes inconsistently, when we don't know if or when the attention is coming back, we don't relax. We fixate, we check the phone, we replay the last conversation, we start organizing our own emotional state around someone else's availability. That's not love deepening. That's a nervous system being trained. And here's the deeper truth about why the gaps exist in the first place. Attention is not infinite. This is simple math, but people miss it because they're distracted by the emotional intensity. If someone is dividing their time, their energy, their presence across multiple people, then by definition, you are only getting access during the windows when you're the priority. The silence isn't a mystery. The silence is where someone else is standing. Now, an avoidant person juggling multiple partners doesn't think of it in those cold, calculated terms. Very rarely is it consciously deliberate. What's actually happening is more instinctual. They're managing bandwidth. They disappear when things start to feel like they require depth, follow-through, or accountability, because depth is expensive and their system isn't built to sustain it in multiple directions at once. So they retreat. And then once the pressure passes, once the coast feels clear again, they return, recharge, re-engage, ready to reset the cycle. Here's the question I want you asking yourself. Would a person who is fully available to you need unexplained time away from you? Not busy, unexplained. Those are two very different things. Busy comes with context. I had a deadline. My family needed me. I was overwhelmed and needed space. Here's why. Unexplained absence comes with nothing, just a return and an expectation that you won't ask questions. This is where so many people talk themselves out of what they already know. They fill in the silence with generous explanations because the alternative feels too painful to sit with. But inconsistency isn't a mystery for you to solve. It's a message you're being sent, and it connects directly to what we're about to look at next. Because if someone's time is being divided, sooner or later, so is your access to their world. Which brings us to the third sign, the compartmentalizing. The walls they build not around their time, but around their life. So the time is inconsistent. The definition is missing. And now we arrive at something even more revealing, because it's not just about when they show up. It's about where they'll let you stand. Notice this. You've never met the friends, never met the family. You don't know the coworkers' names. You've never been to the apartment on a random Tuesday. You've never crossed paths with the people who make up the actual architecture of their life. Every plan happens in a container, a specific restaurant, a specific hour, a specific setting that they control. And if you step back and really look at it, you'll see it's not random, it's engineering. Here's the psychological principle underneath this. Compartmentalization is how the mind manages contradiction. When someone is holding multiple relationships at once, the single greatest threat to that system isn't guilt, it's collision. It's two worlds touching. It's your name coming up in a conversation it was never supposed to be part of. So the avoidant mind does what every mind does when it's protecting a fragile structure. It builds walls, not out of malice necessarily, but out of the instinct to keep every compartment sealed from every other one. And I want you to notice something deeper here, because this is where it gets philosophical. A relationship that can't survive contact with the rest of someone's life was never fully real to begin with. Think about that. If you are truly, fully part of someone's world, you don't stay contained in a single room of it. You bleed into the other rooms. You meet the friend at the grocery store by accident. You get added to the group chat. You become part of the story they tell, not just a scene they visit. When someone keeps you permanently in one room, no windows, no doors to the rest of the house, that is not privacy. That is not taking things slow. That is inventory control. Now, ask yourself this question, because it's the one that cuts through all the rationalizing. If I disappeared tomorrow, would anyone in their life even know I existed? Sit with that, because the answer tells you everything about what role you're actually playing, whether you're a partner or whether you're an asset being managed off the books. There's also something quietly devastating about this pattern, and it's worth naming directly. Isolation is easier to control than integration. A person who exists in your life fully, who has opinions from your friends, context from your family, a reputation among people who know you, that person becomes harder to deceive, harder to overlook, harder to quietly replace. But a person kept in a sealed compartment, they can be managed, scheduled, rotated. This is why the absence of integration should never be mistaken for mystery or privacy or just their personality. It is a structural choice. And structural choices reveal priorities far more honestly than words ever will. Which brings us to what happens inside that sealed room. Because once someone has secured the walls around you, the next thing they control is how deep you're allowed to go. Which takes us to the fourth sign, the ceiling on emotional intimacy that never quite lifts no matter how much time passes. So they've sealed the room. Now let's talk about what happens inside it, because this is where people get most confused, most easily fooled. This is the sign that hides in plain sight because it doesn't look like distance. It looks like closeness. Here's what I mean. The physical intimacy is there. The chemistry is there. The late night conversations, the compliments, the I've never felt this way before, all of it is there. And so people assume if the connection feels this intense, it must be deep. But intensity and depth are not the same thing. One is a spike, the other is a foundation. And an avoidant person juggling multiple partners becomes remarkably skilled at generating the spike while never laying the foundation. Notice where the conversation stalls. You can talk about attraction, about plans for the weekend, about surface level opinions and shared jokes. But try to go somewhere real. Try to talk about fears, about the future, about what happens when things get hard, about family wounds or long-term vision, and watch what happens. The subject changes. The mood shifts to something lighter, or the physical intimacy conveniently escalates, redirecting the moment before it can become a real conversation. This is not coincidence. This is design. Again, not always conscious, but functional all the same. Because here's the psychological truth. Vulnerability is the entry fee for genuine intimacy. And genuine intimacy is expensive to sustain across multiple people. You cannot be truly known by someone deeply and specifically if that same depth is being budgeted out across several relationships at once. There isn't enough of that currency to go around. So the avoidant partner keeps the exchange at a level that feels good without ever costing them the one thing that's actually scarce, their real, unguarded self. I want you to think about this philosophically for a moment, because it matters. Physical closeness without emotional depth is not intimacy, it's proximity. It's two people standing near each other without ever actually meeting. And it's remarkably easy to mistake one for the other, especially when the proximity comes wrapped in passion, attention, and desire. We're taught culturally that heat equals connection, but heat is cheap to produce. Depth is not. Here's the question worth asking yourself. How much do they actually know about who I am? Not what I look like, not how I make them feel, but who I actually am. And just as important, how much do you actually know about them beyond the version they've curated for this specific room you've been placed in? If the honest answer is surprisingly little, after weeks, months, sometimes longer, that's not slow burn romance. That's a ceiling, and ceilings don't lift on their own. They lift when someone chooses to remove them. And an avoidant person managing multiple partners has no incentive to make that choice, because depth in one direction threatens the entire structure holding up the others. This is how someone can be physically present, verbally affectionate, seemingly engaged, and still be a stranger to you in every way that actually matters. And once you start noticing that ceiling, you'll start noticing something else too. The small inconsistencies in what they tell you, the details that don't quite line up, which brings us to the fifth sign, the stories that almost make sense until you look closely enough. So we've covered the ambiguity, the inconsistency, the compartmentalization, the ceiling on depth. And now we arrive at the sign that most people notice last. Not because it's subtle, but because we train ourselves not to see it. This is the sign written in the small details, the stories that almost add up. You know the feeling. Something they said last month doesn't quite match what they're saying now. The timeline has a gap in it. The explanation for where they were is technically plausible, but something about it doesn't sit right. Not because you caught them in an obvious lie, but because the details feel rehearsed instead of remembered. Real memories are messy. They have specific unnecessary details. The color of the chair, the fact that the waiter got the order wrong. Constructed explanations are cleaner than that. They hit the necessary points and stop, and then there's the phone. The device that never used to matter now matters enormously. It's turned face down. It's taken into another room for a call. Notifications are cleared before you can even glance at them. Now, I want to be careful here because privacy alone is not evidence of anything. Everyone deserves boundaries. But there's a difference between someone who simply values privacy consistently and someone whose relationship to their phone changes specifically around you, specifically in moments that would otherwise invite transparency. Here's the psychological principle at work. Cognitive load reveals what comfort conceals. When someone is telling the truth, they don't have to manage the truth. It just exists, consistent, available, unchanging, no matter who asks or when. But when someone is managing multiple stories across multiple people, they're running a kind of mental ledger. And ledgers, no matter how carefully kept, occasionally don't balance. A detail shifts. A day doesn't line up. Someone forgets which version they told you. This is why I want you to trust something most of us have been taught to override, the feeling of something's off, even when you can't yet prove it. That feeling isn't paranoia. It's pattern recognition happening faster than conscious thought. Your mind is picking up on inconsistencies before your logical brain has assembled them into a case you'd feel confident presenting. That gap between what you sense and what you can prove is exactly the space avoidant partners rely on, because they know most people won't act on a feeling alone. They'll wait for proof. And proof, conveniently, is very hard to gather when you've been kept in a sealed room, on a rotating schedule, with a relationship that was never clearly defined in the first place. Here's the deeper truth I want to leave you with on this point. You are not responsible for building an airtight legal case before you're allowed to trust your own perception. One inconsistency might be nothing. A pattern of them is not nothing. A pattern is a message, and it's usually the most honest one you're getting. So now we've named all 5 signs, but signs on their own are just observations. What matters is what you do once you can see the pattern clearly, which is exactly where I want to take us next. So let's pull all 5 threads together now, because individually, each one can be explained away. Collectively, they cannot. The ambiguity on its own, maybe they're just cautious. The inconsistent time, maybe they're just busy. The compartmentalization, maybe they're just private. The emotional ceiling, maybe they're just slow to open up. The small inconsistencies, maybe you're just overthinking it. This is how it works. This is how it survives. Each individual piece is small enough to rationalize, but a pattern is not the sum of coincidences. A pattern is a signature, and once you can see the signature, you cannot unsee it. Here's what I want you to understand at the deepest level about why this works on intelligent, capable, emotionally aware people, because it does. This isn't a trap for the naive. It's a trap for the hopeful. It works because somewhere underneath the confusion, there's a feeling, not of certainty, but of anxiety. A low hum of unease you've learned to carry so long you've stopped noticing it's there. You've adapted to it, you've built explanations around it, you've made yourself smaller and more patient to accommodate it. And I want to name something plainly. That feeling is not a flaw in you. That feeling is data. It is your nervous system accurately reporting that something in this relationship does not add up, even when your mind hasn't yet assembled the proof. Here is the question that matters more than any other in this entire conversation. Do you feel more secure in this relationship over time or more anxious? Because that is the test, not intensity, not chemistry, not how good it feels in the moments when they choose to show up. Real love, real partnership produces safety that compounds. You feel more certain of your place in someone's life next month than you did last month, not less. If instead you feel like you're perpetually auditioning, perpetually interpreting, perpetually managing your own expectations downward to survive the uncertainty, that is not a relationship deepening. That is a nervous system adapting to threat and calling it love because the alternative is admitting how much it costs to keep hoping. And here is the truth I want you to leave this room with today. You were never meant to be a detective in your own relationship. You were never meant to build a case, gather evidence, and cross-reference stories just to determine whether you're actually valued. That is not intimacy, that is investigation. And the moment a relationship requires investigation instead of trust, it has already told you what you need to know. You don't need 5 signs to become certainty. You need one honest question asked of yourself in a quiet moment. Am I building a life with someone, or am I one appointment in someone else's rotation? Trust that answer. Not because you have proof beyond doubt, but because you deserve a relationship so clear, so consistent, so undivided, that doubt never had to become your full-time job in the first place. You don't need more evidence to walk toward better. You just need the courage to stop defending what was never fully yours to begin with. So here's where we are. We started with a question that felt simple on the surface. How do you know? And we've walked through 5 signs that on their own might look like nothing, but together tell a story that's impossible to misread. The ambiguity that keeps every door open. The silence that has a rhythm you were never told about. The walls built around a life you were never fully let into. The depth that never arrives, no matter how much time passes. The small inconsistencies that your mind noticed long before your voice was willing to name them. But I don't want you leaving here today just holding a checklist. Checklists are useful, but they're not the point. The point is something bigger, and I want to say it to you plainly. You are allowed to want a relationship that doesn't require this much analysis to feel safe in. Think about that for a second. Somewhere along the way, so many of us were taught that love is supposed to be complicated, that if it's confusing, it must be deep, that if we're anxious, it must mean we care. I am telling you directly that this is one of the great misunderstandings of the human heart. Confusion is not depth. Anxiety is not passion. Those are signals, not of a love that's rare and worth fighting for, but of a structure that was never built to hold you fully in the first place. Here's the shift I want you to make, starting today. Right now, in this room, stop asking, what do I need to do to make this clearer? And start asking, why am I the one working so hard to create clarity that should already exist? Because in every relationship where you are genuinely valued, genuinely chosen, genuinely a priority, you do not have to manufacture that certainty yourself. It is simply there, offered, given, not extracted through vigilance. I'll leave you with this. The people who are truly capable of loving you, fully, honestly, without a rotation, without a sealed room, without a ceiling on how close you're allowed to get, those people exist. But you will never recognize them, and you will never make room for them if you stay fluent in the language of settling. Every ounce of energy you spend interpreting mixed signals is energy you are not spending building a life with someone who never gives you mixed signals to begin with. So walk out of here today and ask yourself the only question that actually matters. Am I choosing this because it's right or because I've mistaken familiarity for worth? You already know the answer. You've known it for a while. The only thing left is what you decide to do with it.